Hello, everybody. My name is Martina. I am a data scientist by profession, but in this talk, I'm not going to talk specifically about data science. I'm going to talk about something that is an area of doing work with data, which I think is a bit underrated within the data science space, which is illustrating, visualizing information. So data visualization. Why do I think it's underrated? Well, because most of the time, what the data science part of doing work with data presents is kind of scientific graphs, which are great, but they are great for people that work in the field. While instead we are, as visual, beings, we are very much attracted by good visuals and alluring kind of presentations. So I think it's very useful to learn a little bit more about design, data journalism, how to really present information in a way that is both exciting, alluring, maybe a little bit artsy, but at the same time it's scientific and rigorous and based on facts, of course. So this is something I try to do in my little project. It's a little project I carry out, which is about doing data visualization, specifically by drawing it by hand, so pen and paper. That's because after experimenting a bit with a few software options, I was learning D3, and it's so great, it's amazing, but I found that the best way that works for me is really doing it with pen and paper. Filling it, scrapping it, and redoing it. I just have lots of fun. So I just want to share a bit of the process I normally go through to realize what I call my data cards, which are these kinds of things. So this is, for example, a data card about the percentage of women, country by country in Europe, that are in work. So it's just a map, and every country is basically colored up to the percentage that the percentage of women that work in their country. So I try to be as good as I can in illustrating data, but this is not really my field, my background, because I come from science, and again, I have expertise in data science. So it's something I'm learning along the way, and there's been loads of failures that I made, which are super educational, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those too. Sometimes I do things which are more kind of infographics more than data vids, in the sense that they're more big numbers, really more flashy and more meant to give a quick piece of information in a bite, really. Or I do things that take me basically 2 days or something like that, something like this one, which I'm going to talk a little bit more. It's an arc graph about cocktails, so it's about alcohol. Or there's more recently something I'm doing, which is a series, so it's a bit of a notebook on climate change. There's a few things in here, and I'm going to explain a bit of these ones. So there's simple things like line graphs, or more complex things that also take me a while. Maybe some of them may have a bit of a drawing element. I don't draw well, and I'm not intending to draw well. I'm intended to learn along the way, but that's not my main desire in a way. My main desire is to convey information in an alluring and rigorous way, and also to have fun. There's things which are kind of simple in the information conveyed, but it requires lots of thinking on my side in terms of how do I present this information in a snappy way. Or there's things which are more traditional kind of graphs, the more scientific graphs, going back to what I was saying before, but they are done still with an element of cartoonish feel. So in this talk, what I'm going to do is present what I've learned and what I still have to improve in this process of gathering information and making it appear on paper. And specifically, I'm going to focus on 2 things. How to go from having a question, which might be very broad, very big, very vague, and possibly even ill-posed, to gathering the data, if there is any data available that you can get, to try to answer it, and maybe in doing this process, you discover that actually the data that you will want either doesn't exist, it's not good enough, it's not complete. That's super common, and it's actually very common in data science, generally speaking. So we're not new to this, except that when you want to draw it, when you want to design it, you need to be wary of the fact that the information that you may have is incomplete. And so how do you make this clear in a bits so that people don't misinterpret it? And the other thing is actually what I'm learning a bit about design and illustration and perception of things lately, about how to visualize a piece of information on paper. So yeah, hope you like it. So let's go. So on the topic of gathering data for your question, this is one of the videos I've done for the My Climate Change series. And my question here was, does the media talk more recently, more than it used to be, about climate change? Is the number of mentions to climate change in the media increasing in time? So to answer this, that is a big, it's a big question. It could even be a research question, really. So I had to find a good proxy for what I meant by the media, but also for what I meant for number of stories. What kind of stories? What are we really talking about? So after thinking about this and realizing that there would be no way in this amount of time that I could gather all the information, all the data regarding the media in general, I decided to narrow down the question to newspapers as one source of the media. And then, even then, I had to go and scout a few of the newspapers that allow me to gather some data about the number of stories, in this case the number of published articles that will talk about climate change. So now, because there isn't really a systematic way that I could do this, so it's not like I could use some API easily and I could just quickly at least derive some information, I've decided to go for the New York Times. Because practically speaking, it's got an interface where you can really, you can really query for some keywords and it spits out the articles retrospectively in time since it was founded, and it gives you the count that respond to that query. And also, it is an authoritative newspaper with an international reach. So even though it's an American paper, of course, but it would give me a decent proxy for what I wanted. I could potentially do this more systematically in some ways. I could use Google News, I could use some other newspapers, but it would have taken me maybe longer time than it was worth for this little project. So I decided this was a good proxy. So again, define your question a little bit better, narrow it down if you need to, and find a proxy for your results. So what I learned from this was quite interesting, actually. So I've taken, and this was my spreadsheet, like I was painstakingly taking the number of, this number here, of results responding to a query. The query was climate change and global warming. This is, again, another situation where I had to choose a proxy. What is it that characterizes climate change? I didn't want to use any NLP or specific kind of thing because I didn't have the data to do that. I didn't have the opportunity to do much sophistication. So I had to find something that would represent things quite well. So I've just gone for literally a silly keyword search, choosing these two things because these two phrases, to me, are the ones that most often occur when the article is about climate change. So I've gone here, taken all these results and put them into a spreadsheet, literally year by year. And what happens is that you discover that there is a bit of an upward trend, which is actually more visible in recent years. This is climate change and this is global warming. It's interesting how they switch at some point and then it goes back to the fact that climate change is more present than the other. This is for the quality of results, for assessing really what you're looking when you're looking whether it's actually real, you want to benchmark it, in this case, against all the stories published by the New York Times, which seems quite, apart from some noisy, the trend is kind of flat, except for a bit of an upward, a spike here, which corresponds to 2009, and it's kind of the same spike that you will see for climate change alone. So my question here, which arose from looking at this, was why do we see a spike in 2009 about the stories published on climate change? Well, turns out that 2009 was the year of the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen. It was also the year of the world financial crisis, one of the years, roughly peaked there. So maybe the New York Times was publishing more stories about both things together. That's why you will see both the spike in here, but also about all stories in general, which is quite interesting. So I'd have to go and investigate more whether other papers were doing the same. You know, it may turn out that during the world financial crisis, the most recent one, people were just publishing more things in general. I don't know. I should measure these against at least a few other papers. But it was interesting for the sake of doing this exercise, because clearly there is some spurious data here. However, roughly speaking, because the number of articles total doesn't really increase, it goes up and down a bit, but it's kind of flat here, about 100k a year, you discover that actually there is a bit of an upward trend. So you can, I think, safely say that the New York Times is talking more about climate change. Bear in mind that in doing this, of course, climate change here may mean, and this is the result for, say, 1 week, may mean that there are stories that are not necessarily about the policies, the politics, the economics, what happens in places. There's also stories, or the science, there's also stories about we did something for kids to explain climate change. There is something about explaining things to the public. There's something about movies. You know, I don't remember when some of the movies that are more talking about this topic came out, something like Day After Tomorrow. It might be that there is a spike because of that. Maybe it went to the Oscars or whatever it was, some spurious effect into this data. However, I still think that you can say that there is an upward trend. So the media is, generally speaking, talking a little bit more about climate change. So this one was pretty nice in the group of those where there isn't much data to draw really, and you're just trying to do it in a more illustrative, cartoonish, artsy way. So the message here, and this is data from a documentary called Chasing Coral, which derives from scientific papers and a bunch of reviews. The main message here is that in 30 years, largely due to bleaching, we lost 50% of global corals. So I've just drawn a picture of coral in the 90s versus a picture of 50% its size in the 2020s. So this is one card I'm particularly proud and happy with. Apologies, it's in Italian. It's because it's about an Italian thing. It's about Italian history. So this is about the neo-fascist massacres that happened in the country during the so-called lead years, mainly the 70s. So all data that there is here really is a timeline of when these massacres happen, and the dots represent when they happen in the timeline and how big they were in terms of the number of people here, in terms of, you know, the size of the bubble. But also I was putting stuff on a map with the same color coding to represent when they happen. So you will see mainly that they happen in the north of Italy. There's only one thing that happened in the south. This little bit here is telling you the number of total dead people, 135, and the number of total wounded people, 580. So really, this isn't really data visualization. It's more like maybe a bit of an unconventional way to represent data that I think I took from Wikipedia. So didn't have to do much of the data gathering in this case. But it was very useful for me to educate myself and to also, you know, educate myself about how much time
was passing in between things. So the first time was things were pretty near one another, and then there's been a huge amount of years until the last one, which was in Bologna in 1980. So yeah, it was good fun.
So it's not always the case that everything goes well. There's lots of failures along the way that can happen. Most of the failures are in the illustration, visualization bit. So failures in the sense that some things that maybe I've designed, I've tried to convey as visual information, I've just didn't manage to do a good job. I create something confusing, maybe there's too much stuff, or it's just, somehow unclear. Or maybe the bit of information I was hoping to convey isn't there, and some other things appear more prominent than others. So let me show you some.
So this is one of those cards that I consider as a bit of a failure, because I think it's rather confusing in what I was trying to do and the way I didn't manage to express it. So this was supposed to be a map of the USA, state by state, that is showing the affiliation in terms of political affiliation of each state, that was taken from a Gallup poll, versus the percentage of people that estimated that think that climate change is due to human activity, which was estimated by the Yale climate opinion maps. It's the Yale University that does these surveys, investigations every year. So two kind of, numerical values, and I was trying to put them all on the single map. And the way I thought it would be a good idea, and then it didn't turn out to be a good idea, is coloring the map state by state by this estimated percentage of people that believe that climate change is anthropocentric. That's the green part. So the greener, the better. And you can see actually that from the map state on the coasts, both coasts are more, more scientific orientated in these regards. But then, how did I put in the political affiliation as a square, coloring them by the canonical colors that are associated with the Republican, the Democrat, and there's also a contested state in yellow? Well, it's very hard to read this map. When I looked at it, I just realized that, and also other people told me that that's the case. So I don't think this works, even though you need to kind of spend a couple of minutes to really understand the main message here. The main message was states in the middle, Midwest, maybe the South, are not only very Republican normally, but they also quite non very believers in climate change, at least not in the anthropocentric nature of it. So what could I have done here? Maybe put them on a scatter plot. That would have made simply more sense, or find another way using the sides instead of the color two times, using maybe a gradient of color for one thing and the size of the state for another thing. I'm not super sure, but definitely something could have been done here.
Okay, this one, I don't know what you think of this one. I'd be really happy to have some feedback, because I didn't have much on this one. And normally some people tell me something in the comments or just in private, and just I learn a lot from this. So I'm not sure about this one. This is a card where I was meaning to convey the information that Italian governments normally last not that long, because I'm Italian, and in my whole life I always had the impression that one government collapses after the other. I was trying to prove this. So data is from Wikipedia. There wasn't much to do in terms of data gathering. There was just a bit of polishing and calculating durations from dates that I had to do, and it was small data, so you could do it in a spreadsheet quite quickly. But when you go and do a timeline, so that's on the x-axis, that's the year when the government was elected and started taking office, and you put on the y then the actual duration days of the government until its eventual collapse. Most of these collapsed before the natural end of the mandate, which is, the story here really. You kind of have redundant information in this way, because you are doing the length,
which literally is, the width of these segments. And you are repeating the information that is already on the y-axis. So this is the most, the government that lasted the most, and it's also got this little part here that is the longest. Now, because there's many of these since Italy became a republic in 46, you can't possibly appreciate maybe the differences between these little lines, because there's simply not enough horizontal space. But still, you will, after you spend maybe a minute, you will see that there is redundant information. So that's the bit that doesn't convince me. How could I have displayed this better? I'm not sure. Open for feedback here. Anyway, it was quite interesting because you discover something pretty interesting. This is the average duration in days. So slightly more than a year of Italian governments. It's quite abysmal, really. Okay, so this one was the worst of my failures. This is really, really wrong. What I was trying to investigate here is kind of the proportion of countries which in various decades and in the West were considered as democratic or autocratic. There is a way to assess this, and data is taken from our wording data. There's a way to assess this via historiographic documentation, and there is a way to kind of measure this that I was using. But this database really doesn't work. So I was trying to use a Nightingale chart, which is this exploded radial chart, which is really a bad choice for this thing. So the areas are supposed to represent the numbers of countries which are in the green, the democratic ones, and in the red, the autocratic ones. So my question was, can we assess from a pool of Western countries what has been their trajectory in terms of being democratic, autocratic in the various decades since 1900s? I don't think this says anything, really. It really is a bad way to represent this, and I think I figured out while I was doing it, but anyway, because I was going with it, I kept finishing it after calling this a failure. It really doesn't tell you much. So the first few decades of the last century were kind of dominated by autocracy. But then what happens? Like here, 1980, 1960. What is it? I think here there's multiple things going on that are really, really wrong. The representation, so the kind of chart used, but also the way that I was showing the mutual proportion of each. So yeah, I keep this as my main representative of what is a bad data viz. That wasn't my intention to do a bad data viz. I don't think I've thought through properly in the design process whether this kind of charting will work. I just gone with it, and I've assumed that it will work, but it didn't. So lesson learned. This is another one which is kind of in the artsy category because there's not much data. This is a science blog that was referring to a paper published on the Science Journal. It's about the fact that the Arctic as region is warming twice as fast as the other places on Earth, something I didn't know. But I read the blog via some kind of Twitter tweet or whatever it was, and I've decided it was worth a little card. And the way I represented this is just by using shades of red. So there's orange for kind of the rest of the world, and the Arctic is really colored in red. So there's not much data here. Really, there is absolutely no data, but was more an infographic kind of vidzing here. So again, on my series on climate change, that's one of my favorite topics for cards because, well, it's interesting scientifically, and it's also interesting, I think, to display to people in a more visual way. I don't think this happens very often, and it's such a big and important topic that I think everybody could benefit from being a bit more educated about it. So I'm trying to educate myself about it via doing this, which is fun, and it's also tragic. So this is one card about the impact of livestock and meat production. The data is from Our World in Data, which reports data from the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. All it is saying is that we are producing more and more meat, and the richer we get, the more meat we eat, which is kind of intuitive. I don't think there's much to be surprised about here. But I'm reporting this as a way to display data in terms of doing something, a regular kind of canonical type of graphing data here. There's not much fancy that I could do here, I think. I just had to go with the more general way of displaying this kind of information. So there's a line graph of the tons of meat produced. This is meat from livestock, so specifically meant for human consumption. A year, it is rising, and the kilograms of meat eaten per capita each year, country by country, considering a few representative countries, which is saying it doesn't report any causal in relationship here, of course. This is just a scatter plot that it tells you that there is a correlation with the GDP per capita. So the richer the countries in terms of GDP per capita, the more meat they consume. There could be loads of other confounding factors that contribute to this, such as the availability of meat in the first place and how easy it is to grow them, to grow animals for the consumption of humans. But it is interesting. When countries have been moving towards higher wealth, they have also started eating more meat. This comes from considerations that go way beyond a little scatter plot that displays a simple correlation. Pie chart. Pie charts are either hated or loved, depending on who you are and what you do. But in this case, I thought this is really a good way to display the fact that livestock, the growing livestock contributes by 14.5% to global emissions, which is a fair amount. So livestock is really a big contributor to climate change, and this card contains some words. The global demand for meat is rising, and the richer we get, the more meat we seem to eat. So this is just to say that sometimes the canonical ways of displaying data via simple scatter plots, line plots, pie charts, all of these things that everybody knows about, is really the one that goes a long way. There wasn't really much else I thought that I could do here that would add to the information and would make it even clearer than what it is already. So just the innovative bit about doing this is just about the drawing part and finding colors that will make sense. I've chosen red because meat reminds me of red, and I've complemented it with some white. In this case, emissions, what do you think about? Maybe some gray, because you think about gray skies, and smoke. But then you put the red, the highlighted part of this in red again. So I thought this one was a nice plot. It doesn't take you much brain power to understand it. It doesn't take you much time. And the important bit is that you understand that there is so much more to say about this phenomenon than just a few graphs. So it's not just the case that this explains it all. This is just showing you some line trends, some timelines, and some correlation. So it makes you think, I think. So yeah, I was quite happy with this one.
Okay, this one is also one of those I am quite happy with, and it took me, I think, a few days to really conceive how to represent these data sets. This is about the families of viruses and how populated they are. So I was trying to convey the information of how many families there are known and how many viruses are there in each family, or at least how many species are there in the family. So I had to go and research a bit of how people do viral taxonomies, which normally work this way. You got species at the very bottom, then genera, families, orders, classes, phyla, kingdoms, and realms. This is data that you could take from a combination of Wikipedia. There's a few websites that report the scientific taxonomization really of viruses, and there's also two main ways to do this in the scientific community, so I've chosen one. And then after the data gathering procedure, where I was myself learning a lot about viruses and how many varieties really there are that at least we know about, the problem was how to illustrate this in a way that would be understandable by everyone, because I'm not a biologist myself, so I wouldn't know many of these things. So I decided to use kind of a creative donut chart in a way, where each family is represented on this donut, which has a width based on the number of species that are there. So the most populated family is the Cephobiridae. And I was also putting some little illustrations for the shape of these viruses for the main ones. And then I colored them by whether their nucleic acid is DNA or RNA, and there's a few reverse transcribing, most notably, of course, HIV. So you will see that the most populated families are DNA based. There is another piece of information that I just thought after the fact. This is again a bit of a failure in deciding how to transform all of this information, which is a lot, into a visual form. And I just thought after the fact that maybe it would be useful to know whether these viruses are known to infect humans or not. And then I put this as a little red line here. So you will see that actually the most populated families do not infect humans at all. Here you find some that do and a bunch of that don't. And also, maybe from here you can even see that the ones that mostly affect humans are the RNA-based ones. Of course, coronaviruses are somewhere around, where are they? Yeah, SARS-CoV, then there would be SARS-CoV-2 and all of the other coronaviruses. Then there's other things like influenza, Ebola, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it was a way for me to both do data gathering. I had to learn a lot about viral taxonomies. That was very interesting. But also illustrating this in a form that would be, I think, understandable. I think there could be loads of things that one could potentially improve here, for sure. But it was for me quite educational. I think this was good.
So thank you very much for following along until here, and you can follow me on socials, on Twitter or Instagram or whatever you want, and for more data drawings, more data cards, for giving more feedback, to see more failures, and to let me learn a little bit more, or suggestions. You found the data sets that you thought might be interesting for a data card. Please let me know. I'm really looking forward to get better and to do more stuff. So please do. And yeah, great. Catch you there.